Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Gwen Morrison with the store, and advance it. Excuse me. Down or there we go. That's me. I'm Gwen Morrison with the store, and I'm delighted that all of you could join us from parts of all over the world. Many of the WPP companies and a number of our clients have logged on to join us for what I hope is going to be a very informative session for you all. One of the reasons we're doing this today is it's the last day of the National Retail Federation's big show. It's an annual conference that draws an international audience of retailers, technology companies, all kinds of groups that serve the retail industry, and of course agencies and WPP participants. There are about 30,000 delegates at this year's show, a huge number of international delegates. So I would say one of the biggest shows ever, and certainly a refreshing and upbeat group coming out of the recession. 2 years ago it was much more doom and gloom and just keep breathing, and this year the theme was much more about technology and engagement. This is the title of the show, Retailers' New Rules, Engage and Evolve. And I think there are two aspects of this engaging and evolving. It was, evolve after this recession or financial crisis in many parts, not all parts of the world, and looking at engagement in new ways, especially with the technology available to us. How do we engage and make things more personal and useful to the shopper so that they're much more loyal to our brands and have the potential to buy more, of course. Some of the key themes, if I were going through all of the presentations and some of the discussion in the hallway, which is always so valuable. From a retailer's perspective, there's a huge issue is how to set priorities given the constant change in the digital landscape. And this is keeping our eye on the ball, being true to our brand, and yet allowing ourselves to experiment and at times fail because we're trying things for the first time. One comment from one of the retailers was, well, I just want to have a little mad money, on the side of my budget so we can, drive some new innovation and not be afraid to fail. Still do things right based on our learnings and our approach to our marketing programs, but also to experiment on the side. A lot of emphasis on the My Store. There was I'll get into Macy's in a moment, but how do we customize a store environment on any kind of device so that it's much more personalized, and also use a device to travel through a store that picks up on what I'm interested with and give me content when and where I need it. And on the topic of content, there was an interesting quote from Burberry that we're not just a fashion company, we're actually now a content provider. And so content goes beyond the products. It's the point of view, the imagery, and the kind of fashion show runway that they deliver to their audience. Just this past fall, they were allowing their fans to access the new runway items before they got out on the runway. So Facebook fans were given the privilege of seeing the new designs before the press. And I made the comparison of how the Obama campaign did something groundbreaking along those lines when they announced news to their Facebook fans before they went to the political press. So this is kind of evolving on that notion of getting one-to-one communication and managing brand content. Speaking of presidents, we did have President Bill Clinton address the National Retail Federation, which was pretty exciting. And of course he was asked specifically what he bought for Christmas and where did he buy it. But backing up, he gave an interesting perspective on the global economy at large, and paid tribute to the retail industry for the fact that retail in most parts of the world has grown more than the rest of the economy. So we're seeing some very positive signs, and he gave some interesting personal insights, etc. So a neat presentation from President Clinton. One of the sessions which I happened to lead was about engaging with shoppers in a world of fragmentation and change, how to connect, how to differentiate, and grow. I don't think there's anything controversial there. I think we're all trying to figure that out. And I was fortunate to have the perspective from Bob Thacker, who was with Target for many years and most recently head of marketing for OfficeMax. We had an important client magazine, Luiza from Brazil, and they were sharing some interesting programs for customization. I'll share an example soon. We had Peapod, Harrods, and JCPenney. So a great lineup of talent for a discussion early in the show. One of the examples I shared, which is about, again, content, connection, was a Macy's program developed in part by our friends here at J. Walter Thompson. I should thank J. Walter Thompson for hosting our session, JWT in New York today. But with this Macy's Backstage Pass, we got this idea of really getting connected with their exclusive designers and the detailing behind their products. All of this is about opting in. You can be online or you can go in the store and access the content through a mobile device, through a QR code. Tommy Hilfiger, for example, would describe the specific detailing on a product and give you more information about sizing and other options within the line. So they have a lot of content from Martha Stewart. They had Bobbi Brown in cosmetics, etc. So again, this idea, we're not just selling goods, we're creating relationships, we're connecting, and we're developing content that have to be consistent with our brand. I mentioned Magazine Luiza. There we go. There we go. I don't know if you're all familiar with Magazine Luiza, a wonderful consumer electronics appliance, and they branched out into other categories as well. They're in Brazil, and using building on the insight that many people in Brazil are interested in personal selling, and the growing use of Facebook, social media. They are in test with a program called Magazine Voce to allow an individual fan of Magazine Luiza to create their own store. So you typically go through their inventory and select what you'd like, and then this is Magazine Gwen you're looking at. This is my assortment of products related to travel, and I can post this on Facebook, and my friends who would shop my store will select the item. It'll be shipped, processed and shipped by Magazine Luiza, but I will get a commission of between 2.5% and 4% on these items. So an exciting new idea that, again, brings that personal one-to-one social media and connectivity all together. So a lot of the show is, well, what's next? Because it seems like every other week we're learning about a new website. One that was just presented today is Open Sky, a new way to bring all different kinds of curators, whether it's in style, food, health, or design, and then you can select who you want to be curating the product that you're interested in, and it all comes to you. So rather than one store, we're getting the recommendations of these curators and the products that they're selecting. So we're seeing all kinds of opportunity with the customization online, and then the technology aspect of it with the presentations we had from Intel and Cisco and Microsoft. I mean, there was a huge range of augmented reality, virtual reality, all kinds of new tools. The key is how to make it meaningful to the customer. How does it fit in with the brand and how we want to sell and engage with the shopper? So we'll keep our eye on new technologies and certainly be posting them to our site. So I just wanted to wrap up with a couple of thoughts. When we're looking at retailers who are coming together from all different parts of the world and all different economies, I think there's still fundamental principles about how to be in this business. And there was certainly an aspect of, we have to be, how do we relate what's true to our brand and still tap into all of this technology out there, but not lose sight of who we are and where we want to go. So there was a lot of reflection at the show about how to not just employ technology to drive our business, but how to make it meaningful in terms of who we are, given the proliferation, not just of media, but of retail in general. So now I'm very pleased to pass the baton, if you will, to Walker Smith from Futures Company. I gave him a call, I guess last summer, and I said, we've talked about this economic crisis and then the recovery economy, and we all agree that the sky didn't fall, but where is it? It's hanging kind of low, so where is this consumer? So Walker's going to come in and tell us about some of the recent research that they've pulled together and how they're looking at the mindset of the consumer here in 2012. So, Walker?
Thanks very much, Gwen. We're getting our technology together here. There we go. Let's see if I can maybe get a little camera shot that doesn't cut off my head quite so much there. Of course, don't have a lot of hair, so I don't want to show you too much of that head to start with. But I appreciate everybody joining us here this afternoon, and thanks very much for that generous introduction. If you're not familiar with the Futures Company, let me just say 30 seconds about us. We have been tracking consumer values and lifestyles around the world for several decades, and we very much have a focus on growth opportunities for our clients. So we are trying to identify consumer targets, consumer trends, emerging, breaking lifestyle opportunities that can really lead to some growth opportunities for our clients in the marketplace. And today I want to try and provide a little bit of that focus as we think about what some of the opportunities might be in this consumer marketplace. Get my deck up here, and we'll begin to give this a shot. There are a few key ideas in this marketplace that I think are particularly important for us to bear in mind. To begin with, as was clear at the National Retail Federation this week, this is a marketplace in flux. There is a lot going on, and in fact, a lot going on that is going to require that we rethink the ways in which we do business. Not simply our business models, but our basic understanding of what's important to consumers and what drives them as a motive force in the marketplace. And that is a lot of what I want to talk about here this afternoon. Not retail per se, but the consumer that retail is after. And when we put together a lot of the key trends that we've seen here just in the last couple of days at the National Retail Federation, and we think about how that fits into this emerging consumer motivations and lifestyle aspirations, we begin to get a sense of where there are some opportunities, even in a marketplace that is under a lot of pressure nowadays. It's important to remember that notwithstanding the difficulties that the economy continues to face, there are lots of resilient growth opportunities. And the idea here is to determine what's the key principle, what's the key motive force that can resonate most effectively with consumers. And we kind of summarize that at the Futures Company by saying that principle is an idea of kinship. Now, I'm going to talk about a little bit of that here as we get to the end of the presentation, because I want to make this argument about this new relationship with consumers going forward in kind of three parts. Let's remind ourselves very quickly of what the market conditions are. We are facing a smaller economy. The sky didn't fall, but it did get a little lower. It is a smaller economy in the context of a lot of continuing volatility. But consumers are responding to that in a particular way. They are not giving up their aspirations and their dreams of a better life. They still want to shop, they still want to buy, but they are doing so in a different way. And when we think about what that difference means, it entails much more of a focus on relationships and the way in which we treat people in the marketplace. And this whole focus on treatment and relationships really means that we want consumers to welcome us into their family, quote unquote. And when we're talking about family, the most important relationships that we can identify and prioritize are those that build these bonds of kinship in the marketplace. Now let me just tell you very quickly, kind of at the outset, what I mean by this. If we think very quickly about the relative importance of various priorities in the marketplace, we have come from a marketplace for the last 30 years, certainly the last decade, in the run-up to the recession, that was very much dominated by product considerations. It was all about features and status and luxury, and product really outweighed any considerations of process, if you will, or the way in which we engage with consumers in the marketplace. But we are now moving very rapidly to a marketplace where consumers are much more focused on the how than the what. Much more focused, as we say, on the getting than the get. They really care a lot more about process going forward. They don't care any less about product. They still want all those features and gizmos and luxury and style, but they are much more focused these days on the process and the engagement that we have with them in the marketplace, how people are treated. Now, one of the reasons that this has become more important to consumers, and not the only reason, of course, but one of the drivers, at least in the last few years, are the market conditions that are prevailing in the economy right now. A smaller economy with consumers having less to spend in the context of a lot of volatility that goes on every day. And it's worth just reminding ourselves of this. You know, spending patterns as tracked by the federal government, and you see a little federal economic chart here, has continued to rise since it dropped dramatically in 2008 to the middle of 2009, but it's not as high as it would have been had we not suffered this huge output gap. In other words, we have an economy that is smaller than it might have been had that trend line continued. And you'll note that the continuation of that trend line is largely what was true for the 20 years prior to the Great Recession, including the recession of late 2000 and 2001. We now have an economy that is smaller even though it is continuing to grow. And this economy is smaller because a lot of consumers have in effect been taken out of the economy. They have suffered dramatically. They have lost their jobs. They have suffered significant housing losses. Some of them, a smaller number, have even suffered large losses in the stock market. And all of that has added up to a lot of consumers who simply don't have the wherewithal that they had before. That's not all consumers. That's why it's a two-track economy. And so the question then becomes, where do we source growth in an economy that looks like this? And by the way, this is an economy that is probably going to continue to look like this for years to come. McKinsey recently completed analysis when they looked at what it's going to take to get us back to full employment. And if all of the good things, the optimistic assumptions built into their forecasts come true, we will get back to full employment, so predicts McKinsey, by the year 2020. Yet, if these optimistic assumptions are not fulfilled, we'll never get back to full employment, at least over the next couple of decades. And so we are going to have an economy in continuing into the immediate near term that is going to be challenged by a lot of the things that we have seen here over the past few years. A lot of consumers are simply struggling, and sourcing growth becomes one of our key priorities. All of this occurs, by the way, in the context of a lot of volatility. Now, what do I mean by volatility when I talk about this? Well, you know, do these things sound familiar to you? It's a financial crisis, bailouts, sovereign debt crises, a jobless recovery, wars, terrorism, an historic tsunami, civil uprisings, anti-globalization protest, and rising commodity prices. Does all that sound familiar? Well, no surprise if it does, because this was the state of the world from 1987 to 2007, a period of time otherwise known, as Ben Bernanke put it, as the Great Moderation. Now, if all of that sounds familiar for another reason, it's probably because it sounds like very recent history as well. In fact, right after the Japanese tsunami last year, an economics blog called Calculated Risk took a step back to say, gee, what's the context for consumers these days? And they said, you know, this context includes all of these things in our crisis fatigue list. A Japanese tsunami, higher oil prices and civil uprisings in the Middle East, a housing crisis that continues, sovereign debt crisis in the Eurozone, government cutbacks, the possibility of inflation, and oh, by the way, enduring high unemployment. All of these things create this kind of volatility. But we suffered all of these things before. So what's the difference between then and now? Well, it lies in our sense of confidence and control. Indeed, emblematic of 87 to 2007 is a speech that Nobel Prize-winning economist Robert Lucas gave to other economists when he took the presidency of the American Economic Association in January of 2003, and in which he said, macroeconomics has solved the problem of depression prevention. During that period of the Great Moderation, we didn't worry about all of these things occurring because we felt in control. Emblematic of today is what Ben Bernanke had to say about the economy last June when he said, we don't have a clue what's going on in the economy today. The difference between then and now lies in this context of confidence and control. We used to have it, we don't feel it anymore. And that weighs on the ways in which consumers think about shopping and think about the marketplace. This chart actually shows the Conference Board's Consumer Confidence Index tracked back to the mid-1970s. And what you see here in the period of time since the end of the Great Recession is a lower baseline of consumer sentiment. Forget all these month-to-month reports about consumer sentiment going up or down. That's just all wobble about the line. What we have nowadays is a lower baseline of consumer confidence and consumer sentiment. And that's occurring in this world of volatility that is reshaping the ways in which we are approaching the marketplace as consumers. A smaller economy and a more volatile economy. And this, in fact, has changed a lot of the ways in which consumers think about shopping. When we asked consumers a year or so ago the reasons that you were becoming more conservative in your spending, things related to overall anxiety were mentioned twice as often as things related to finances per se. Concerns about the future, concerns about the economy, this volatility, this lack of a sense of confidence and control is taking its toll on the consumer mindset. And indeed, it is changing the ways in which consumers are thinking about what they want from brands and what they want out of their lifestyles. Indeed, as we like to say recently at the Futures Company, the force of repulsion is now the primary motive force in the consumer marketplace. Remember what it used to be like? We all had lifestyle aspirations. We were all looking up to achieve them. Brands had magnetism that could attract us, and our engagement in the marketplace was all about having those kinds of experiences. Nowadays, it's very different. Consumers are not thinking about the things they don't have so much anymore as the things that they might actually lose. Consumers aren't comparing themselves anymore to people who have more. They are comparing themselves nowadays to people who have lost it all. And what they are trying to do is become one of those people who loses everything in this economy. And so what's driving consumers nowadays are not the aspirations that attract them, but the aversive things that are repulsing them from that kind of situation. They're simply trying to avoid tumbling off the edge of the cliff. And so they are looking less for brands that have this kind of magnetism and more for brands that offer this kind of a safe haven. It is this focus on the process of coping rather than the accumulation of products that is driving consumers nowadays. Process over product. And we see this played out in aspirational dynamics in the marketplace. The pull and tug of the top has given way to the push and foreboding of the bottom. Not just these market conditions, but the market dynamics of consumer response. A new way people are thinking about the American dream and the good life, and the tenacity that people are showing in the ways in which they are responding to that and adapting. And it's worth taking a brief look at each of these. The American dream first. The most important thing to know about the American dream nowadays is that people have not given up their desire to have all of these aspirational products. People still want stuff. Indeed, in our research, when we break consumers out into groups of those who have lost faith in the American dream and those who still believe it is a real possibility, there is essentially no difference between them in their attitudes about spending and their attitudes about buying things in the marketplace. It is, in fact, no renunciation at all of materialism. There's been a lot of talk about this in the media, but consumers are not giving up their desire for nice things. Notwithstanding all the hardships we face financially, we still want more comfortable lifestyles. So there has been no change in the material aspects of the American dream, but yet people are still expressing some concern about the possibility of realizing it. And so when you think about exactly what it is that people have lost, it is more a belief in the process for the American dream than the end point of the American dream. In fact, when you look at people divided into those who believe the American dream is lost versus those who believe it is a real possibility, those who have lost faith in the American dream are much more likely to have lost the sense that they have the opportunity to achieve it or that the process continues to work fairly. They are more likely to believe that business is too concerned with profits, that there is inequality, that service people don't care about them, that companies must treat people fairly, and that they want opportunities to customize things. They've lost faith in the process. They have not lost faith in the product, but they have lost faith in the process. And what they want out of the marketplace today is more a restoration of the process. They want their opportunities. They want a fair shot. When you see Occupy protesters throwing smoke bombs over the fence around the White House, it is all about a lost sense of opportunity. It's not about walking away from a materially comfortable lifestyle. It is about having the opportunity to achieve that. And indeed, we see this process response in the very tenacity that consumers are displaying in the marketplace. In the run-up to the recession, the ambition was all about trading up, and it was very much focused on product first, going upscale, winning. It was all about what you get. Now, in the wake of the recession, we have consumers of two types, two tracks. We have some consumers who are simply trading down. And that, by the way, is all about process. Because as I've said before, frugality is not an aspiration, it's a coping mechanism. And people who are trading down aren't giving up their aspirations, they're simply engaged in a process for coping. They might be settling for less, but it is simply that. They still want to achieve what they want if the process can work for them. For other consumers, and by the way, the largest group of consumers, they are simply trading off. which is to say they are prioritizing. And when you prioritize, it's all about process. It's not about an ambition at all. It's not to say what I do reflects my ambition, like trading up. It is to say what I do is my method of coping so that I can get what I want. I put something at the top of the list, and I trade down on everything else. But it is no less about winning. It is simply a different style or process of making decisions. It's how you get what you want. And in fact, another way to contrast these sorts of three styles of consumption, pre-recession and the two tracks post-recession, is to look at them in terms of the various dimensions of mindset, motivation, and shopping. Now, I'm not going to go through all the elements of this table here, but let me just point you to three things in particular. First, if you look at mindset, it was about indulgence. It is now much more about vigilance in today's marketplace. It is much more about watching out, protecting, avoiding. It is that repulsive force, vigilance, not that attractive force, indulgence, that is driving consumers these days. And that, by the way, is no less a strategy for winning. You know, it's kind of like football. You can have an offensively minded football team or a defensively minded football team. The fact that you don't run a wide open passing offense doesn't mean you're not trying to win. So consumers who are much more defensive in today's marketplace are not trying to lose. They are simply taking another strategy towards winning, and it is winning through process as opposed to winning through product as it was before. And by the way, that means consumers are going to shop very differently. Whereas consumers were very quick to make decisions and jump into the ball game before, now they are much more reserved, much more vigilant, much more likely to act deliberately and slowly. Again, it doesn't mean consumers are dropping out, but it does mean that there is a different sense in which we have to engage consumers and a different path that consumers are going to go down as they engage with us in the marketplace. So these conditions and this consumer reaction then leads to some growth opportunities in the marketplace. So I'm going to wrap up here very quickly by just reminding us that this focus on process means it's all about relationships, and when it's all about relationships, the premier relationships are family relationships, quote unquote, which means we have to think in terms of the principle of kinship, as I said at the outset. Now, when I talk about relationships, as I said before, I'm not talking about a rejection of materialism. Materialism in the past defined the context of meaning for most of our lives. We are going to have just as much materialism going forward, but that materialism is going to be engaged in within the broader context of meaning. It's not going to define the context for meaning. It is going to be defined within the context for meaning. And what provides meaning in people's lifestyles is relationships. Indeed, another way to think about this is in terms of the language that is being used by many to describe the different kind of pyramid that the economy has nowadays. We've gone from a material economy to an experience economy to what nowadays is being described as a social economy. That's what it is. The benefit that that has delivered historically has been tangible benefits to intangible benefits, and now today it's all about interactions. The benefit is the ability to engage with others, which means there has been a change in the locus of value in the marketplace. From the product, which provided the material, tangible benefits, to the service, which was the experiential intangibles, to today, the process that facilitates these kinds of social interactions that drive what people are looking for. And just to give you a few examples of a way to think about this, I'm not going to spend a lot of time with these, but just to kind of quickly mention, imagine a different new product introduction model. The standard approach is to find a needs gap and then launch a product. It's product first and hope we can develop a relationship afterwards. But what if we were to establish the relationship first, well before the product, and then bring a product in behind it? And in fact, that's the example that you see here, a new development in Washington, D.C. being launched by the sons of one of the most famous real estate developers of the last 30 or 40 years, and they're working in Washington, D.C., and before they open any retail space in this development, they allow people who live in the area to discuss it, to vote on it, and maybe even to invest in it first. As opposed to bringing something in and then trying to build a relationship behind it, they are focused on building the relationship first and then bringing a product in that best satisfies that relationship, and in the process enable people to engage with one another, not try to have some superficial relationship with a brand. Virgin America has been running an ad about we're all in this together, where they say, please don't be the person talking across others, or never coming out of the bathroom, or taking up all the armrest space, or going to sleep on somebody else, or wandering up and down the aisles after you've had too much to drink. Why? Because it's all about how we treat each other. We're all in this together. In fact, Yahoo has launched a website that's still available called How Good Grows, where you can go and tweet out all the nice things that people have done for you and all the nice things that you have done for people, and then see how that resonates and see the ripple effects of that in the Twitter sphere. All about relationships. And the final example, of course, are these Budweiser ads that are running now, these grab some buds, which is a little wordplay about your friends and buddies. And it's not just having fun with others, because that's always standard fare for beer advertising, but a firm salute to the priority of relationships, showing Budweiser not as the center of attention, but as simply a way of facilitating that. All about relationships. And when relationships matter, kinship is where we want to go. Not brand relationships, people relationships. What makes for kinship? Well, it's bloodlines. That's how I know you're part of my family, and that means consumers need to claim you, quote unquote. Perfect use of social media, perfect metric for social media success. Intimacy, which is all about transparency. And finally, altruism, or bending over backwards with consumers. And let me just conclude with a little illustration of what I mean here by altruism in the service domain. Altruism, of course, as biologists will tell you, is the ultimate element of a family relationship, because you are willing to put down your life in order to preserve your genetic line. You will sacrifice for your family. And that's exactly how brands have to think about their relationships with their customers. They have to give up their own interest if they expect consumers to act similarly in return. And that means bend over backwards in service, bend over backwards in rituals and fluidity. That's what consumers tell us in our data that they are looking for from brands. In fact, it's not just the same old service, if we think just about service. It's new ways to provide service for consumers. Service like you would have a relationship with a family member, which is all about well-being, not loyalty. For example, service post-purchase, or service for usage, not just transactions, or lifestyle service instead of product service, or service that doesn't even have anything to do with your category. And by the way, that's what hotels are doing nowadays. As airlines have cut back on their service, hotels are stepping in to say, if airlines won't do it for you, we'll do it for you. And in fact, what they're doing is they're saying we're going to define the service relationship in a different way by decoupling it from the product and making it a focus of process. We're going to define service as a process. Now, when service is coupled to the product, it's kind of the old-fashioned service. You know, there are things you do when you take an airline trip. You compare fares, book a flight, take a flight, arrive. And airlines have all got service that's attached to those product moments. But what if you decouple service from the product moments and couple it instead to an interaction that people have during the product usage or the product engagement? And then you note that there are all kinds of other things that go on before you compare fares, and then all kinds of other things that go on after you book a flight, or after you take a flight, or after you arrive at the gate. And what hotels are doing, as this article from the New York Times that I previously referenced explains, they are building service models around things that are all about the interaction, not things that are tied to product moments. Things that are related to process, not things that are related to product. And that's a kinship relationship. That's a broader kind of interaction that is exactly the sort of thing that consumers are looking for these days. And if you want just a simple way of reminding yourself of this as you go about dealing with your customers in the marketplace, before you act, ask yourself, is this something you do to your own mother? Well, that's it from the Futures Company. Thank you very much, and I'll hand it back over to Gwen.
Well, before you hand it over, I have a couple questions.
Sure.
And you can stay where you are.
Okay.
Maybe a comment and a question. One is a lot of what you said resonated with themes coming from the National Retail Federation show.
Sure.
Where they recognized two retailers in particular, Whole Foods and the Container Store.
Yeah.
And those are two stores that exhibit lots of efforts around social responsibility. It's part of their DNA.
Yeah, yeah.
And this idea of the future of responsibility and prosperity, not just about making money,
right,
but also about being rewarding to our employees,
right,
number one.
Right.
And there was a direct correlation between a retailer that had great employee relationships, great benefits, and making money.
Right.
So you
right.
make money by doing all the kinds of things that you're describing.
Right, right,
so
right.
That they do go hand in hand. So
yeah.
we're not abandoning prosperity, but these are really instrumental ingredients to success.
Yeah.
So, for example, Whole Foods was putting a farmer's market right outside their store.
Wow.
And that sounds incongruous
sure.
to their objective, because they're
right.
selling some of that same product or
right.
similar product.
Right.
But the spirit of responsibility to that community and a celebration of their core values around food and health and well-being, and also local farming, all come together when you do something like that.
Right,
So it was
right.
actually grew their business, didn't take it away.
Well, and a farmer's market, of course, is one of those places where people like to gather and interact with one another, so they're actually creating a venue that facilitates
right.
social interaction. And again, one of the points that I didn't emphasize much, but one that I think is important to remember is that consumers aren't looking for brand relationships. You know, this whole notion of brand relationships that took over our marketing thinking for so many years is not what consumers want. They just don't want to have a relationship with a brand. They want to have a relationship with other people. Mm-hmm. And so brands can't get in the way of that, and brands can't presume that a relationship with consumers is what consumers want. What consumers want are brands that facilitate their ability to interact with other people.
Right.
And so, that's one of the rules of social media these days. It's not about your content. It's about whether your content facilitates sharing, and if it does, then it's interesting content. So it's all about these kinds of relationships.
Now here's my question. We have
Sure.
a lot of people who are watching this from all around the world.
Right.
And a lot of the statistics that you describe are, of course,
right.
American-based.
Right.
So we know I'm sure a lot of what you're talking about directly applies to what's going on in Europe these
yes.
days with
right.
that
Very
volatility
much.
and uncertainty.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But we also have pockets of great growth and optimism when we look in, especially countries in South America.
Right.
So
right.
what would you... But how much does the consumer mindset and attitude impact what is we're looking at as optimism as
right.
people are coming out of very severe circumstances
sure.
and moving into the formal economy?
Right. Well, I think there are a couple things going on there. So one is, of course, that the top of this pyramid is affecting the entire world. So this predominance of the social economy is in place everywhere, and the social economy delivers a different kind of benefit, and it puts value in a different kind of place. There's a different kind of locus of value, and so what we have in some markets, more developed markets, is kind of the culmination of rising up through this pyramid. In other markets, what we have is kind of this dynamic sort of swooping in as they're coming up through these other steps as well. And so in developed markets like China in particular, where luxury and premium and status are still very big drivers of shoppers in the marketplace, you have these things all occurring at once. The difference between where China is today and where, say, the U.S. marketplace was decades back is that China is faced with this social economy at the exact same time. And so relationships don't become any less important, but they do become part of a different kind of mix in other parts of the world. But this whole focus on process and its sort of equal stature with everything else is an important part of the marketplace everywhere.
Okay, great. Yeah. Well, if you have any questions, we will be happy for you to send them to me by email, and then between Walker and myself, we can get back to you. And I'm G. Morrison. Should we advance this one more? G. Morrison at WPP.com. I think a lot of you have our email. And get back on screen here. And then I wanted to thank Walker for being a part of this. I want to thank J. Walter Thompson, JWT New York, for hosting us here. You've been very generous with your technical support and the facility here, and also to thank Melinda Meyer for organizing this and getting everybody engaged. So thank you so much. Bye-bye.